The toughest final table of all time was said to be the $5,000 buy-in at the Queen's Classic in 1996. The final four players in that event were Doyle Brunson, Chip Reese, Erik Seidel, and TJ Cloutier. Probably four of the toughest players ever, and that includes Erik Seidel, because for some reason people have gotten the idea that Erik Seidel is a bad player because they've watched Rounders and they saw him get owned by Johnny Chan. But make no mistake about it, Erik Seidel would destroy you. I've watched him play before. He's methodical, he's mathematical, you can't read him. He's a great, great player. So anyway, if you were sitting at that final table, I probably would have advised you to shake all their hands and just give them all your chips. But assuming you're not playing against players of that caliber, how do you know when you're beat? You're in a hand, you're facing a big bet, and you want to ask yourself the kind of questions the pros ask themselves when they're trying to decide where they stand. This is where the rubber really hits the road in No Limit Hold'em. So here are the three questions that the pros ask themselves when they're trying to figure out if they're beat. The first question is, what is my opponent trying to convince me of? This goes back to our video on reading your opponent. Is your opponent trying to look strong? Are they trying to convince you they have a big hand? Are they looking really confident? Maybe they're not so confident. Putting together the pieces of the puzzle and trying to figure out what they're trying to convince you of so that you can do the opposite of that, because most often weak means strong and strong means weak, as we know. Number two, do I have a strong hand? Now, this may seem real obvious, but as we're going to see in an example we're going to get to, it's not so obvious. Because if you're facing a big bet, you may need a really strong hand to be able to call that bet. So even if you thought your hand was strong earlier, it may not be so strong anymore if you're facing a big bet. And the third question to ask yourself is, what hands would it make sense for my opponent to have at this point? Are there any hands that he could possibly be holding that could beat me? And we're also going to look at that in an example right now. So let's take a look at a hand here that will demonstrate some of these concepts. And we've got Ace-King, and there's been a raise from early position by a good player. We could choose to re-raise here, that wouldn't be an error, but I like to just call in this position. I don't like to take the chance that I'm going to get re-raised again by him and that I'd have to fold my Ace-King. So I'm going to go ahead and just call here. And we hit a great flop, Ace-Jack-4. He checks to us, so we're certainly going to bet here. We're going to bet about the size of the pot. And he called. Okay, another inconsequential card on the turn. Now, let's say we decide to bet again here. Well, we got check raised. This is not what we were hoping for. And it's put us in a position where we're going to have to make a tough decision here. So this goes back to what I was saying before about, do I have a strong hand? Ace-King with an ace on the flop certainly was a strong hand before. But now that our opponent has chosen to check raise us on the turn, all of a sudden we're not feeling so good about it anymore. And in fact, against a good player like this, I can almost assure you that if you call this bet, you're going to lose your money. The problem is, even if you do call here, he's going to bet again on the river, and you're going to have to call a river bet also. So you've really put yourself in a bad position if you choose to call here. And as they say, big pots are won by big hands, and one pair is not a big hand anymore, so the correct play here is going to be to fold. We also can ask ourselves question number 3, which is, what hands would it make sense for my opponent to have at this point? Well, there are two very likely hands he could have. He certainly could have played a pair of jacks. He would have raised with that before the flop, so he could have a set of jacks at this point. He also could have had something like ace-jack suited. Some players will raise with that from early position. So two very possible hands that he could have that he would have played this way, and we can feel pretty confident that if we were to go to the river with this one, we're going to get showed one of those two hands, and we're going to lose our money. So remember to always ask yourself those 3 questions when you're in a difficult position. Number 1, what is my opponent trying to convince me of? Number 2, do I have a strong hand or a really strong hand if I'm facing a big bet or a check raise? And number 3, what hands would it make sense for my opponent to have at this point, and can any of them beat me? If you ask yourself these 3 questions, you'll find yourself losing a lot less money when you're beat. And that is a very important part of the puzzle, because the less money you lose, the more money you're going to go home with. Alright, thanks for watching. Be sure to visit testyourpoker.com to get your free Poker IQ score and to check out our other videos.